Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the scanner at the entrance of the Callow Station slave market, her stomach churning with disgust. The metal detector beeped, and she quickly explained her medical scanner to the board's Ephirian guard, who barely glanced at her credentials. As a registered trauma medic working the Outer Rim territories, she had legitimate reasons to be here, though none she was proud of. The underground market sprawled beneath the station's commercial district, a labyrinth of cages and pens where the galaxy's unwanted found themselves sold to the highest bidder. The air reeked of desperation, alien sweat, and something else she couldn't identify. Bioluminescent strips provided dim lighting that cast eerie shadows across the cramped walkways. Sarah wasn't here to buy. She was here because 3 days ago she'd received an encrypted message from Dr. Marcus Webb, her former colleague who disappeared 6 months earlier while researching illegal genetic experiments. The message contained only coordinates and a single word: help. She moved through the market with practiced medical detachment, noting the various species crammed into enclosures designed for beings half their size. Tall, elegant Altarians with their crystalline skin dulled by malnutrition, stocky Corvan miners with their natural armor scratched and dented, even a few humans, though slavery of their own species was technically illegal in this sector. The coordinates led her to the deepest section of the market, where the air grew thick and humid. Here the merchandise was different. These weren't laborers or servants. These were creatures so exotic, so rare, that even their captivity was considered a luxury for the wealthy. You looking for something specific, human? The voice belonged to a Thrakari merchant, his forearms gesturing toward various cages, while his compound eyes tracked her movement. I got fresh stock from the Andromeda raids, very exclusive. Just browsing, Sarah replied, though her skin crawled at his casual mention of raids. She knew what that meant. Entire colonies wiped out, survivors sold to fund the next attack. She was about to turn away when she heard it. A sound so soft she almost missed it beneath the general noise of the market. A whimper, barely audible, coming from a cage tucked away in the corner. Sarah approached slowly, her medical scanner already in her hand, though she tried to keep it hidden. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. Inside the cramped cage lay what appeared to be a dragon hatchling, though unlike any species she'd encountered in her xenobiology studies. Its scales were pure white, almost translucent, and its body was roughly the size of a house cat. But what made her gasp was the creature's condition. Its entire body was covered in what looked like millions of tiny barnacles, each one pulsing with a sickly yellow light. The hatchling's breathing was labored, and she could see patches where the barnacles had grown so thick they were restricting movement. Its eyes, when they fluttered open, were a brilliant silver that seemed to hold an intelligence far beyond what she'd expect from such a young creature. That one's not for sale, the Thrakari merchant said, having noticed her interest. Worthless. Been trying to figure out what to do with it for weeks. The parasites make it unsuitable for most buyers. Parasites? Sarah kept her voice neutral, while her scanner worked quietly, taking readings through the cage bars. Picked it up from a derelict ship near the void gates. Whole crew was dead, but this thing was still alive in some kind of stasis pod. The barnacles were already there. Probably what killed the crew. The merchant's mandibles clicked in annoyance. Thought I could clean it up, but nothing works. They just keep multiplying. Sarah's scanner beeped softly and she glanced at the readings. Her blood ran cold. The barnacles weren't just parasites. According to her scanner, they were some kind of symbiotic organism with energy readings that shouldn't exist, and the dragon itself registered as having cellular structures she'd never seen before. How much? She asked before she could stop herself. The Thrakari's compound eyes swiveled toward her with sudden interest. Thought you said you were just browsing. I'm a medic. I've seen parasitic infections before. Maybe I can clean it up. The merchant laughed, a sound like grinding metal. You humans and your savior complexes. Tell you what, give me 500 credits and it's yours. Consider it a mercy killing. 500 credits was nearly her entire savings, money she'd been setting aside for her own medical research. But as she looked at the suffering creature, she found herself nodding. Deal. The transaction was completed quickly, the merchant clearly eager to be rid of his problem. Sarah arranged for the cage to be delivered to her medical bay on the station's upper levels, claiming she needed proper containment for the parasites. Back in her sterile medical facility, Sarah carefully transferred the dragon hatchling to a quarantine chamber. Up close, the creature was even more remarkable. Despite its obvious suffering, it moved with a grace that spoke of hidden strength, and those silver eyes tracked her movements with unmistakable intelligence. "Easy there, little one," she murmured, running more detailed scans. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The results were astounding. The dragon's DNA contained sequences she'd never encountered, with complex protein structures that defied current understanding of biological evolution. But more concerning were the barnacles. They weren't just feeding off the dragon. They were somehow connected to its nervous system, creating a feedback loop that was slowly poisoning both organisms. As she worked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was connected to Marcus's disappearance. The coordinates, the timing, even the location where the dragon had been found all pointed to something larger than a simple rescue mission. The dragon's eyes followed her as she prepared her initial treatment plan. There was something almost human in that gaze, a desperate hope that made her chest tighten. Whatever this creature was, wherever it had come from, it didn't deserve to suffer. "Don't worry," she whispered, adjusting the quarantine chamber's environmental controls. "I'm going to help you. I just hope I'm not too late." Outside her medical bay, the station hummed with its usual activity, unaware that in a small quarantine chamber a human medic was about to discover something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Sarah spent the next 18 hours running every diagnostic test she could think of. The dragon hatchling, which she'd started calling Echo, due to the way its mental presence seemed to resonate in her thoughts, remained cooperative despite its obvious discomfort. Each time she approached the quarantine chamber, those intelligent silver eyes would track her movements with what could only be described as hope. The barnacles were unlike anything in her medical database. They appeared to be a hybrid organism, part organic and part something else entirely. Her quantum scanner detected energy signatures that registered off the charts, patterns that reminded her of the theoretical studies she'd read about dimensional rifts and void space anomalies. "Computer, cross-reference these energy readings with any known parasitic organisms in the galactic medical database," she instructed, uploading the latest scan results. "No matches found," the computer replied in its neutral tone. "However, energy signature bears 67% similarity to readings from the Void Gate incident of 2387. Sarah's hand stilled on her equipment. The Void Gate incident was classified at the highest levels, but she remembered the aftermath. Entire star systems had gone dark overnight. The official reports claimed equipment malfunction, but rumors spoke of something far more sinister. Something that had come through from another dimension entirely. A soft chirping sound drew her attention back to Echo. The dragon was trying to communicate, its small head tilted in what appeared to be curiosity. When their eyes met, Sarah felt an odd sensation like someone gently touching the edges of her thoughts. "Are you telepathic?" she whispered, moving closer to the containment field. Echo's response wasn't words, but rather a flood of images and emotions. Pain, certainly, but also gratitude and something that felt like ancient memory. Sarah saw flashes of a vast ship traveling through space that looked wrong, twisted in ways that hurt to perceive. She saw beings in environmental suits working frantically at control panels while reality seemed to bend around them. The connection broke suddenly, leaving Sarah gasping. Echo slumped in the chamber, the effort having clearly exhausted the small creature. But now Sarah understood. This wasn't just a dragon with parasites. This was a survivor of something catastrophic, something that had happened in the spaces between dimensions. She began formulating a treatment plan based on her new understanding. The barnacles weren't just feeding off Echo's life force. They were anchoring something, keeping a doorway partially open to wherever Echo had come from. Removing them would require more than just medical intervention. It would require understanding forces that existed beyond normal space. Sarah's fingers flew across her workstation as she accessed her personal research files. During her medical training, she'd specialized in xenobiology with a focus on dimensional anomalies. Most of her colleagues had considered it a waste of time, but now that obscure knowledge might be the key to saving Echo's life. "Computer, Initiate Quantum Resonance Protocol 7. I need to map the dimensional signatures of both the host organism and the parasitic attachments. The medical bay hummed with increased energy as specialized sensors activated. The readings that came back confirmed her worst fears and her wildest hopes simultaneously. Echo wasn't from their dimension at all. The dragon was native to a space that existed parallel to their own reality, a place where the laws of physics worked differently. The Barnacles were interdimensional parasites, creatures that existed in the spaces between realities. They fed on the quantum friction created when beings from different dimensions occupied the same space. No wonder nothing in the medical database had been able to identify them. As she worked, Sarah became aware of a growing presence in her mind. Echo was reaching out again, but this time the communication was clearer, more controlled. Images flowed between them showing the dragon's home dimension, a place of impossible beauty where creatures like Echo soared through crystalline skies above cities that floated in midair. But there were also darker images. The arrival of the barnacle creatures spreading like a plague across Echo's homeworld. The desperate evacuation attempts as entire civilizations fell to the interdimensional parasites. And finally, the last ship, the one Echo had been aboard, making the dangerous jump to normal space in search of help. "Your people are still out there," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. "They're fighting these things." Echo's response was a mix of hope and desperation. The dragon's people were indeed still fighting, but they were losing. The barnacles multiplied faster than they could be contained, and each victory was temporary at best. Echo had been sent as a messenger, carrying genetic information that might hold the key to developing a weapon against the parasites. But the transition to normal space had gone wrong. The ship's crew had died from dimensional shock, and Echo had been left in stasis, slowly being consumed by the very creatures they were trying to defeat. Sarah felt her determination harden. This wasn't just about saving one creature anymore. If Echo was telling the truth, then entire civilizations were depending on what happened in this medical bay. She began the first treatment protocol. Using a combination of quantum stabilizers and dimensional frequency modulators, she jury-rigged from her equipment. The goal wasn't to kill the barnacles outright, which might damage Echo in the process, but to disrupt their connection to their home dimension gradually. The procedure was delicate work. Each barnacle had to be isolated and its dimensional signature mapped before the connection could be safely severed. Sarah worked for hours, her hands steady despite the knowledge that one mistake could either kill Echo or potentially create a dimensional rift in the middle of a populated space. As the first few barnacles withered and fell away, Echo's breathing became noticeably easier. The silver eyes brightened, and Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash through their mental connection. But she also sensed something else. Relief, certainly, but also urgency. Time was running out for Echo's people, and every moment spent in treatment was another moment their homeworld suffered. "I know," Sarah murmured, carefully removing another cluster of parasites. "We'll work as fast as we can, but I need you alive if we're going to help anyone." The work continued through the night. With each barnacle removed, Echo grew stronger, but Sarah grew more exhausted. The quantum manipulations required constant mental focus, and maintaining the telepathic connection was draining her energy faster than she'd anticipated. By the time the station's artificial dawn cycle began, Sarah had managed to clear roughly 10% of the barnacles from Echo's body. It was progress, but at this rate it would take weeks to complete the treatment. Time they might not have if Echo's memories were accurate. As Sarah finally allowed herself a brief rest, Echo's thoughts touched hers one more time. The dragon was sharing something new now. Not memories of the past, but visions of the future. Sarah saw herself standing before creatures she'd never imagined. Beings of light and energy who regarded her with something approaching reverence. But she also saw darker possibilities. The barnacles spreading to other dimensions, consuming reality itself until nothing remained but endless hunger in the void between worlds. Sarah straightened her shoulders and returned to her work. Whatever this small dragon represented, whatever forces were at play beyond her understanding, she would not fail. Humanity had always been known for their stubbornness in the face of impossible odds. Today she would prove that reputation was well earned. 3 days into the treatment process, Sarah's medical bay received an unexpected visitor. She was deep in concentration, carefully removing a particularly stubborn cluster of barnacles from Echo's wing membrane. When her security alert chimed, Dr. Chen, "You have a visitor requesting immediate access," the station's AI announced. "Individual identifies as Dr. Marcus Webb. Credentials verified." Sarah's hands froze over her instruments. Marcus was alive, but how had he found her? And more importantly, how had he known about Echo? "Send him in," she said, not taking her eyes off her patient. Echo's mental touch conveyed curiosity mixed with wariness. The dragon could sense her emotional turmoil through their connection. The door hissed open, and Marcus Webb stepped into her medical bay, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the 6 months since his disappearance. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his clothes bearing the distinctive wear patterns of someone who'd spent time in deep space, but his eyes were alert, focused, and filled with an urgency that made Sarah's pulse quicken. "Sarah, thank God you found it," he said without preamble, moving toward Echo's containment chamber. "I wasn't sure my message got through." "Your message led me to a slave market, Marcus. I found Echo by accident." Sarah kept her voice steady, though her mind was racing. "Where have you been? What do you know about this creature?" Marcus ran his hands through his graying hair, a gesture she remembered from their days working together at the Terran Medical Research Institute. "It's not an accident, Sarah. Nothing about this is accidental. That dragon is the key to preventing a galactic catastrophe." He activated a portable holoprojector, filling the air between them with images that made Sarah's blood run cold. Star systems consumed by spreading darkness, planets reduced to empty husks, ships drifting dead in space while strange barnacle-like growths covered their hulls. "This is what's coming," Marcus said, his voice grim. "The creatures you're removing from that dragon aren't just parasites. They're scouts, advance agents of something that exists in the spaces between dimensions, and they're getting ready to invade our reality in force." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she set down her instruments. "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been to the other side." Marcus's statement hung in the air like a physical weight. 6 months ago, I was recruited by a classified government project investigating dimensional anomalies. We thought we were studying theoretical physics. Instead, we opened a door to hell. Echo stirred in the containment chamber, silver eyes focusing on Marcus with what appeared to be recognition. Through their mental link, Sarah felt the dragon's reaction to the newcomer. Not fear, but something more complex. Hope mixed with ancient sadness. "The dragon knows you," Sarah observed. "Not me specifically, but my kind. Humans, it turns out, have a unique neurological structure that makes us naturally resistant to dimensional parasites. It's something to do with our evolutionary development under specific quantum conditions that exist around Sul." Marcus approached the chamber slowly, and Echo watched him with obvious intelligence. "We're not immune, but we can survive exposure longer than any other known species. That's why you disappeared. You were exposed to these parasites yourself." Marcus nodded, rolling up his sleeve to reveal several small faded marks on his forearm. "I was infected during our first contact with the other dimension. But instead of consuming me like they did the rest of my team, the parasites eventually died. My immune system adapted and fought them off." Sarah felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "And Echo's people discovered this resistance. They've been searching for a species that could serve as natural antibodies against the parasite invasion. The dragon was part of a desperate scouting mission, looking for immune carriers who could be used to develop a weapon." Marcus's expression grew grave. "Sarah, Echo isn't just a victim. It's an ambassador." The implications hit her like a physical blow. Everything she'd assumed about her patient, about this entire situation, had been wrong. She looked at Echo with new understanding, seeing not just a suffering creature but a representative of an entire civilization fighting for survival. Through their mental connection, Echo confirmed Marcus's words with a flood of new images. Sarah saw vast fleets of dragon-like beings preparing for battle, their crystalline cities converting into mobile fortresses. She witnessed desperate councils where beings of impossible beauty debated the ethics of involving primitive species in their dimensional war. "They chose humans," Sarah whispered. "They chose us because we're the only ones who stood a chance," Marcus corrected. "Every other species they've encountered either died immediately upon exposure or was completely consumed within hours. Humans can fight these things and win." Echo's mental voice touched Sarah's mind directly for the first time, not just sharing images but actual communication. The dragon's thoughts came through as concepts rather than words, complex ideas that her brain translated automatically. The healing human shows great skill, Echo communicated. Our councils debated long before reaching out to your kind. We do not wish to bring war to peaceful beings, but the devouring darkness spreads. Soon it will consume all realities if not stopped. Sarah found herself able to respond in kind, her thoughts flowing back to Echo with surprising ease. How many of your people survive? Fewer each day. Our homeworld dims as the parasites spread. We estimate perhaps one rotation of your world's time before the last cities fall. Marcus was watching the exchange with fascination. You're communicating with it directly, aren't you? The reports from the project mentioned this possibility, but I've never seen it in action. Echo says their civilization has maybe a year before complete extinction. Sarah turned back to her instruments with renewed urgency. We need to accelerate the treatment process. Actually, we need to do more than that. Marcus activated another section of his holo display. While you've been working on the medical side, I've been investigating the source. The parasites aren't coming from just one dimension. They're a multi-dimensional plague that spreads across realities like a virus. The new images showed a complex map of dimensional space, with infection vectors spreading like poisonous roots through multiple layers of reality. At the center was a dark mass that seemed to absorb light, a source point where the parasites originated. What is that? Sarah asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. We think it's a dimension that died, something that consumed everything within its reality, and now seeks to spread that consumption to others. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. And according to our calculations, our dimension is next on its target list. Echo's reaction to the images was immediate and intense. The dragon's distress flooded through their mental link, carrying with it memories of worlds consumed by creeping darkness, of civilizations that had fought bravely but ultimately fallen to the inexorable hunger. This is why we came to you, Echo communicated. Human minds can perceive the source clearly while other species see only shadow. You may be able to reach where we cannot. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. She was just a trauma medic working the outer rim. She'd never asked to become humanity's representative in an interdimensional war. But looking at Echo's trusting silver eyes, she knew she couldn't turn away. What do you need me to do? She asked Marcus. First, we finish healing Echo. But more importantly, we need to document everything about the treatment process. Every technique. Every quantum signature, every neurological pattern that makes humans resistant to the parasites. Marcus's expression was grim but determined, because once Echo is healed, we're going to war. Outside the medical bay, the space station continued its routine operations, unaware that in a small quarantine chamber, the fate of multiple realities was being decided by a human doctor, a missing researcher, and a dragon from another dimension. The real fight was about to begin. Working together, Sarah and Marcus made remarkable progress. Marcus's knowledge of dimensional physics combined with Sarah's medical expertise allowed them to develop new treatment protocols that removed barnacles at 10 times the previous rate. More importantly, they began to understand why humans were uniquely suited to resist the parasites. Look at these neural pathway scans, Marcus said, highlighting sections of Sarah's brain activity while she communicated with Echo. Your synaptic patterns shift into configurations I've never seen before. It's like your consciousness becomes temporarily multidimensional. Sarah studied the readouts while maintaining her telepathic connection with Echo. The dragon was sharing memories of its homeworld, showing her the elegant civilization that had flourished before the parasite invasion. Crystal spires that sang in harmonious frequencies. Beings of impossible beauty who had mastered both technology and what humans might call magic. Echo's people call it quantum consciousness, Sarah explained, translating the dragon's concepts into human language. They believe consciousness itself is what creates reality across dimensions. The stronger the awareness, the more solid the reality becomes. And humans have particularly strong quantum consciousness? Marcus asked. Not stronger exactly, more stubborn. Sarah smiled despite the gravity of their situation. Echo's people evolved in a dimension where reality is naturally fluid. They adapted to work with that flexibility. Humans evolved in a dimension where reality is rigid, so we developed consciousness that refuses to bend. The implications were staggering. Humanity's legendary stubbornness, their refusal to accept impossible odds, wasn't just a cultural trait. It was a fundamental aspect of human consciousness that made them natural anchors in multidimensional space. Through Echo, Sarah learned that the parasites fed on quantum uncertainty. They consumed the spaces where realities intersected, growing stronger as they devoured the boundaries between dimensions. But human consciousness created zones of absolute certainty, places where reality refused to be flexible enough for the parasites to take hold. That's why the treatment is working so well when you perform it, Marcus realized. Your quantum consciousness creates a stable zone around Echo. The parasites can't maintain their dimensional anchor points in that kind of certainty field. They worked through another day and night, removing the last of the barnacles from Echo's body. As the final parasite withered and fell away, the dragon's transformation was remarkable. Its white scales took on an opalescent shimmer, and its size increased noticeably as its body was finally able to grow properly. But most dramatically, its mental presence expanded exponentially. Where before Echo's telepathic communication had been limited to images and emotions, now complex concepts flowed between the dragon and its human companions with crystal clarity. Echo's intelligence, Sarah realized, had been severely limited by the parasitic infection. Now restored, the creature was easily as intelligent as any human, with access to knowledge spanning multiple dimensions. "I am grateful beyond expression," Echo communicated, its mental voice now carrying harmonics that resonated in frequencies Sarah hadn't known she could perceive. "You have given me not just life but the ability to complete my mission. What happens now?" Sarah asked both mentally and aloud for Marcus's benefit. Echo's response came as a complex information download that took several minutes to fully process. The dragon's people had been preparing for this moment, gathering resources for a final assault on the parasite dimension. But they needed human allies, beings whose quantum consciousness could create stable zones within the enemy's territory. "We do not ask your species to fight our war," Echo explained, "but we need human minds to anchor our forces in the space between dimensions. Without quantum certainty to stabilize our reality, we cannot survive long enough in the parasite realm to destroy their source." Marcus pulled up his dimensional maps again, now enhanced with information Echo had provided. "The target is here," he said, pointing to the dark mass at the center of the infection pattern. "A dimensional core that's been completely consumed by parasites. If we can destroy it, the infection should collapse across all realities." "What kind of forces are we talking about?" Sarah asked. Echo's answer came with visual representations that took her breath away. Fleets of crystalline ships capable of traveling between dimensions, each one carrying beings with powers that bordered on godlike. Weapons that could reshape reality itself, armor that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "But all of our power is useless in the parasite realm," Echo admitted. "There we become as helpless as any creature they consume. Only human consciousness can maintain stability in that place of absolute hunger." Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. She was being asked to convince her entire species to join a war they'd never heard of, against enemies they couldn't comprehend, in dimensions that didn't technically exist. "How many humans would you need?" she asked. "As many as will come. But even a few hundred of your strongest minds could anchor a small strike force. It would be dangerous. Many would not survive. But it is the only path we have found." Marcus was already working at his datapad, accessing communication networks that Sarah hadn't known existed. "I still have contacts in the government project. They've been tracking dimensional anomalies for months without understanding what they were seeing. When they learn the truth, when they understand what's at stake." "You think Earth's governments will cooperate?" Sarah asked skeptically. "I think they won't have a choice." Marcus showed her his screen, which displayed a series of reports from across human space. Strange malfunctions aboard ships near the galactic rim. Colonies reporting equipment failures that defied explanation. Energy readings that matched the dimensional signatures they'd been studying. "The infection is already starting to spread to our reality," Sarah realized with growing horror. Echo's confirmation carried with it images that would haunt her dreams. Human ships drifting dead in space, their crews consumed by parasites that hadn't existed an hour before. Planets where cities had gone dark overnight, their populations vanishing without a trace. "It begins slowly," Echo explained. "The parasites test the barriers between dimensions, sending small incursions to weaken the boundaries. But once they establish a foothold, the invasion accelerates exponentially. How long do we have?" Marcus asked the question Sarah was afraid to voice. At current rates of spread, perhaps 3 of your months before the infection becomes unstoppable in your dimension. After that, your reality will be consumed within a single rotation of your homeworld. 3 months. Sarah's mind reeled at the timeline. 3 months to convince human governments to join an interdimensional war. 3 months to train volunteers for combat in realms that violated the laws of physics. 3 months to save not just humanity but every living being across multiple realities. We'll need to start small, she said finally, her medical training taking over despite the impossible scope of the situation. A volunteer mission proof of concept. Show the governments that this is real and that humans can make a difference. Echoes. Approval radiated through their mental link. Wisdom. A small force of proven minds could accomplish much while the larger preparations are made. Marcus was already making calls, reaching out to contacts in the military, the scientific community, and the shadowy government departments that dealt with classified threats. As Sarah watched him work, she felt a strange calm settling over her. This was beyond anything she'd trained for, beyond anything any human had ever faced. But it was still fundamentally a medical problem. She had a patient. Multiple patients actually, entire civilizations infected by parasites. The scale was unimaginable, but the principle remained the same. Identify the infection, develop a treatment, apply it systematically until the patient was healed. You think like a healer, Echo observed, sensing her thoughts. This gives me hope. Warriors think of victory and defeat. Healers think of restoration and recovery. Perhaps that is what all realities need most now. Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening. She was going to war, but not as a soldier. She was going as a doctor, carrying humanity's gift of stubborn certainty into the space between dimensions. And she was going to cure a plague that threatened the very concept of existence itself. The preparations began immediately. Within 48 hours of Marcus's initial communications, Kalos Station became the center of the most classified operation in human history. Ships arrived hourly carrying representatives from Earth's major governments, military leaders, and scientists whose security clearances Sarah hadn't known existed. The station commander, a gruff Terran Navy veteran named Admiral Torres, had been remarkably cooperative once Marcus shared the dimensional scan data. Apparently, the Navy had been tracking similar anomalies for months without understanding their significance. We've lost 17 ships in the past 6 weeks, Torres explained during a briefing in the station's secure conference room. All in the outer rim sectors, all with the same pattern. Systems failures that our engineers can't explain. Then complete communication blackouts. Echo, now fully recovered and able to take a humanoid form through what it called dimensional adaptation, provided confirmation that chilled everyone present. The dragon's new form was ethereal, translucent, with features that seemed to shift between human and something altogether more alien. Those ships were consumed by scout parasites, Echo explained, its voice carrying harmonic overtones that seemed to resonate in the listener's bones. The infection spreads through quantum mechanical systems first, then organic matter. Your crews would have experienced madness before death as their consciousness was devoured. Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, Earth's leading expert in quantum physics, leaned forward in her chair. You're saying these parasites can consume thoughts? Consciousness creates quantum certainty, Echo replied. When consciousness is consumed, reality becomes uncertain. In that uncertainty, the parasites multiply and spread. Sarah watched the faces around the conference table as the magnitude of the threat became clear. These were people accustomed to dealing with galactic-scale problems, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for enemies that could erase the very concept of existence. What exactly are you asking us to do? General Morrison, head of Earth's Special Operations Command, cut straight to the military implications. Echo's response came with visual aids projected directly into everyone's minds. A disorienting experience for those not used to telepathic communication. They saw the plan in its entirety. A strike force of humans and Echo's people, traveling to the dimension where the parasites originated to destroy their source. The mission would be essentially surgical, Sarah explained, translating Echo's complex concepts into terms the military leaders could understand. Get in, eliminate the core infection, get out. But it has to happen in a realm where normal physics don't apply. How many people are we talking about? Admiral Torres asked. 24 humans maximum, Marcus answered, consulting notes he'd taken during his communications with the interdimensional research team. The dimensional transit technology can't safely handle more than that without risking reality collapse during the crossing. Dr. Reyes whistled softly. 24 people to save the galaxy. The politicians are going to love this. The selection criteria are very specific, Sarah continued. We need individuals with strong quantum consciousness, people whose sense of reality is particularly rigid. Military training helps, but it's not the determining factor. General Morrison's expression was skeptical. And how exactly do we test for quantum consciousness? Echo answered by demonstrating its mental presence touching each person in the room simultaneously. Most people recoiled from the contact, their minds instinctively rejecting the alien presence, but a few, including Sarah herself, remained stable during the telepathic connection. Those who can maintain mental coherence during dimensional contact show the strongest quantum consciousness, Echo explained. They will be able to anchor reality zones within the parasite dimension. Over the following days, testing protocols were established and volunteers began arriving from across human space. The volunteers came from all walks of life: military specialists, scientists, engineers, even a few civilians whose psychological profiles suggested exceptional mental stability. The testing process was grueling. Candidates had to maintain consciousness while experiencing telepathic contact with Echo, demonstrate mental resilience during simulated dimensional displacement, and show the ability to maintain logical thought patterns under extreme psychological stress. Of the 300 volunteers who arrived at Kalos Station, only 18 passed the initial screening. The number was disappointing but not surprising. Echo had warned them that true quantum consciousness was rare in any species. We need 6 more, Sarah told Marcus as they reviewed the list of qualified candidates. Echo says 24 is the minimum for maintaining a stable reality anchor in the parasite dimension. What about the research team survivors? Marcus suggested. The people from my original project who were exposed but survived. They've already proven they can resist parasitic infection. It was a desperate measure, but one that proved fruitful. Of the 7 survivors from Marcus's dimensional research project, 4 still showed strong quantum consciousness despite their traumatic experiences. 2 more came from a classified military unit that had encountered dimensional anomalies during a deep space reconnaissance mission. The final team of 24 was an eclectic group: scientists, soldiers, engineers, and 1 trauma medic who had started the entire chain of events by buying a sick dragon from a slave market. They trained together for 2 weeks, learning to work with Echo's people and familiarizing themselves with technology that operated on principles human science barely understood. The crystalline beings that would accompany them were unlike anything in human experience. Each one was a master of dimensional manipulation, capable of reshaping reality on a local scale. They could create weapons from pure thought, armor from crystallized time, and vehicles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But in the parasite dimension, all of their abilities would be neutralized. There they would be as vulnerable as any other living creature. The humans would become their protection, creating zones of quantum certainty where the crystal beings could function long enough to strike at the infection's core. It's a symbiotic mission structure, Dr. Reyes observed during one of the training sessions. We provide stability. They provide firepower. Echo, now serving as liaison between the 2 species, confirmed this assessment. Your people ground reality. My people shape it. Together we can accomplish what neither could achieve alone. The relationship that developed between the human volunteers and Echo's crystalline warriors was remarkable to watch. Despite vast differences in biology, psychology, and cultural background, both species shared a common trait that transcended dimensional barriers: the will to fight for something larger than themselves. Sarah found herself working closely with a crystal being called Resonance, whose frequency patterns were naturally compatible with her quantum consciousness. Through their partnership, she learned to extend her reality anchor beyond her immediate vicinity, creating stable zones large enough to protect multiple allies. Your species has a gift for adaptation. Resonance communicated through harmonic pulses that Sarah's mind automatically translated. In 2 weeks you have learned techniques that take our younglings decades to master. Stubbornness, Sarah replied. A concept that translated perfectly across dimensional boundaries. We don't like being told something is impossible. The final mission briefing took place in a specially constructed chamber that existed partially outside normal space-time. Echo's people had created a pocket dimension where the team could experience something similar to the environment they would face in the parasite realm. It was a place of absolute horror. Reality twisted and writhed like a living thing in constant pain. The very concept of existence seemed to be under assault, with fundamental constants like gravity and time behaving erratically. And everywhere, the presence of hungry emptiness that sought to devour not just matter and energy, but the possibility of matter and energy ever existing. "This is what we're walking into," Sarah addressed her team, her voice steady despite the psychic pressure of the environment. "Remember your training. Hold on to your certainty. Don't let the environment convince you that reality isn't real." The human volunteers stood firm in the twisted space, their quantum consciousness creating small islands of stability in the chaos. Around them, Echo's crystal warriors prepared their weapons and armor, drawing strength from the reality anchors their human allies provided. Tomorrow, they would cross into the parasite dimension for real. 24 humans and an equal number of crystal beings, carrying the hopes of multiple realities into a realm where hope itself was just another thing to be consumed. Sarah looked at her team, at the brave individuals who had volunteered for a mission that would almost certainly cost many of them their lives. They came from different worlds, different backgrounds, different belief systems, but they shared one crucial trait that would either save all realities or die trying. They were human. And humans did not surrender even to the impossible. The dimensional transit facility constructed by Echo's people defied every principle of engineering Sarah had ever learned. It existed in a state of controlled instability, a gateway that flickered between realities like a flame in an interdimensional wind. The structure itself seemed to be built from crystallized possibility, materials that shifted between solid matter and pure concept, depending on the observer's state of mind. "Remember," Echo communicated to the assembled strike force, its mental voice carrying undertones of ancient sadness and desperate hope. "In the parasite realm, doubt is death. Question your reality for even an instant, and the consumption begins." The 24 human volunteers stood in formation, each paired with a crystal warrior, whose frequency pattern complemented their quantum consciousness. Sarah found herself beside Resonance, the being whose harmonic presence had become as familiar as her own heartbeat over the past weeks of training. Dr. Marcus Webb, serving as the mission's scientific coordinator, ran final checks on the dimensional anchoring equipment each human carried. The devices were hybrid technology, combining human engineering stubbornness with crystal being reality manipulation. They would help maintain stable zones even if the humans themselves became compromised. "Transit in 60 seconds, announced Commander Voss, the mission's military leader. A veteran of 3 galactic conflicts, Voss had volunteered despite having a family waiting for him on Earth. His quantum consciousness readings had been among the highest ever recorded, a manifestation of his absolute certainty in his duty to protect others. Sarah felt her own consciousness reaching out, touching the minds of her fellow humans to create a preliminary network. This was something they'd discovered during training. Human quantum consciousness could be linked, creating amplified zones of reality stability. The effect was exponential rather than additive, meaning 24 linked minds could anchor reality across an area that would normally require hundreds. "Network established," reported Dr. Chen, the team's quantum physicist who shared Sarah's surname but no relation. "All consciousness links stable and synchronized." Through the network, Sarah could feel the determination of her companions. Lieutenant Rodriguez, the demolitions expert who'd grown up in the asteroid mining colonies, carried grim satisfaction at finally having enemies worth fighting. Professor Kim, the theoretical physicist who'd spent her career studying impossible things, radiated intellectual curiosity even in the face of mortal danger. Each mind in the network contributed its own flavor of human stubbornness to the collective certainty field. Together, they became something greater than the sum of their parts, a fortress of absolute reality in a realm where reality itself was under attack. "Transit initiated," Echo announced, and the gateway erupted into blinding light. The passage between dimensions lasted both an eternity and an instant. Sarah felt her consciousness stretched across impossible distances, experiencing every possible version of herself simultaneously. She was a child afraid of the dark, a student struggling through medical school, a doctor making her first life-or-death decision, and a hero volunteering for an impossible mission all at the same time. But through it all, her core certainty remained intact. She was Dr. Sarah Chen. She was human, and she would not be consumed. When the light faded, they stood in hell. The parasite dimension was a realm of active malevolence. The sky, if it could be called a sky, writhed with predatory clouds that reached down with hungry tendrils toward any source of life energy. The ground beneath their feet felt unstable, as if reality itself was only a thin veneer over an abyss of absolute nothingness. And everywhere, the parasites. They were not the barnacle-like creatures that had covered Echo. Here, in their native dimension, they took forms that hurt to perceive directly. Some appeared as geometric impossibilities, angles that folded in on themselves while somehow extending infinitely. Others looked like mathematical equations that solved themselves by consuming the observer's ability to understand mathematics at all. "Reality anchor now," Commander Voss ordered, and the human network activated their collective consciousness. The effect was immediate and dramatic. A sphere of normal space-time expanded around the strike force, pushing back the writhing chaos of the parasite realm. Within this bubble of certainty, physics worked the way they were supposed to. Gravity pointed down. Time flowed forward. Matter remained matter instead of becoming abstract concepts of hunger. The crystal warriors, suddenly able to function in stable reality, immediately began manifesting their weapons and defenses. Resonance created a blade of crystallized time that could cut through dimensional barriers. Other warriors shaped armor from concentrated possibility, weapons from crystallized equations of destruction. "Target is 12 kilometers toward the dimensional core," Echo reported, its form now fully materialized as a dragon of living crystal and light. "The parasites will attempt to overwhelm our certainty field through sheer numbers. We must move quickly." The strike force began their advance through the nightmare landscape. The parasites pressed against their reality bubble like a tide of living hunger, seeking any weakness in their collective certainty. Sarah felt the pressure building against her consciousness, whispers of doubt that tried to convince her that nothing she experienced was real. "You are just a trauma medic," the voices whispered. "What makes you think you can save realities? What makes you think you even exist?" But Sarah's training held firm. Years of making life-or-death decisions under pressure had given her unshakable confidence in her own existence and purpose. She was real because she chose to be real. Her mission mattered because she decided it mattered. Around her, the other humans maintained their portions of the network with similar determination. Lieutenant Rodriguez drew strength from memories of his mining crew family, people who depended on reality being solid and consistent. Professor Kim anchored herself in mathematical principles that remained true regardless of what dimension she existed in. They fought their way toward the dimensional core, the crystal warriors carving paths through parasite swarms, while the humans maintained the reality anchors that made such combat possible. The symbiosis was perfect. Human certainty provided the foundation, crystal being mastery provided the tools to build upon that foundation. But the cost was mounting. The constant psychic pressure of the parasite realm was exhausting the human volunteers. Dr. Martinez, the team's xenobiologist, began showing signs of consciousness fatigue after the first hour. His portion of the reality anchor started fluctuating, requiring the other team members to compensate. "We're losing cohesion," reported Dr. Chen through the mental network. "The parasites are adapting to our certainty frequencies. They're learning to attack the spaces between our individual consciousness fields." Sarah felt it too, the growing pressure against the weak points in their collective mental defense. The parasites weren't just mindless hunger. They were intelligent, strategic, capable of learning and adapting even as the battle progressed. "Then we adapt faster," Commander Voss declared. Through the network, Sarah felt his consciousness expanding, taking on additional load as he rerouted the entire certainty field through his own mental framework. It was an incredibly dangerous maneuver that could burn out his quantum consciousness entirely, but it bought them precious time. The dimensional core loomed ahead of them now, a structure that violated every principle of existence. It appeared to be constructed from crystallized entropy, a palace of organized decay that served as both fortress and spawning ground for the parasites. Dark energy pulsed from its crystalline walls in waves that made reality itself flinch. "There," Echo pointed with one crystal talon toward a spire at the structure's heart. "The core consciousness that commands the parasites. Destroy that, and the entire infection collapses across all dimensions. But between them and their target lay the greatest concentration of parasites they had yet encountered. Millions of the reality-devouring entities swirled around the core like a hurricane of pure hunger, each one seeking to unmake existence itself. Sarah looked at her team, her companions, her fellow humans who had volunteered to carry the burden of multiple realities on their shoulders. They were tired, strained, pushed to the limits of what human consciousness could endure, but they were still human, and humans had never learned when to quit. Final push, she announced to the network. All or nothing. We hold reality together long enough to reach that core, no matter what it costs. The acknowledgement that came back through the mental link was unanimous. 24 human minds, each one absolutely certain that their mission would succeed, even if none of them survived to see it. They charged toward the dimensional core, carrying hope into the heart of absolute despair. The final assault on the dimensional core was unlike anything in recorded history. 24 humans and their crystal warrior allies carved through swarms of parasites that defied description, their reality anchor holding firm against odds that should have been impossible to overcome. Sarah felt her consciousness stretched to its breaking point as she helped maintain the certainty field that kept them all alive. Around her, the other humans were giving everything they had. Dr. Martinez had collapsed 10 minutes into the assault, his mind overloaded by the psychic pressure, but the others had absorbed his load and continued forward. The crystal warriors fought with weapons of pure concept, cutting through parasites with blades made of crystallized mathematics and shields forged from absolute certainty. But even their incredible abilities were being pushed to the limit. Several had already fallen, their forms dissolving back into component light as the parasites overwhelmed their defenses. 50 meters, Echo called out, its dragon form now blazing with dimensional fire as it led the charge toward the core consciousness. The primary parasitic intelligence is just ahead. The core structure rose before them like a mountain of crystallized malevolence. At its peak, Sarah could see something that made her mind recoil in horror. It was intelligence, but intelligence twisted into pure hunger, a consciousness that had evolved to consume other consciousnesses, growing stronger with each reality it devoured. But as they drew closer to their target, Sarah began to notice something the others had missed. The parasites weren't just mindless destroyers. They were sick. The core consciousness wasn't evil in any conventional sense. It was starving, desperate, driven to consume because it had forgotten any other way to exist. Through her medical training and her expanded consciousness from the network link, Sarah could perceive the dimensional equivalent of symptoms. The parasites were displaying behavior patterns that, in biological organisms, would indicate severe malnutrition and psychological trauma. Wait, she called out as the strike force prepared for the final assault. Everyone stop! Commander Voss turned toward her, his consciousness burning with the effort of maintaining their reality anchor against the growing parasitic pressure. Dr. Chen, we need to move now. The network is destabilizing. Look at them, Sarah insisted, her medical instincts overriding every survival impulse. Really look at what the parasites are doing. Through the mental network, she shared her observations with the rest of the team. The parasites weren't attacking with malicious intent. They were feeding with the desperate hunger of starving children. Their aggression was defensive, the behavior of creatures that had learned that everything they encountered would try to hurt them. They're not evil, she realized, the understanding hitting her like a physical blow. They're traumatized. Something turned them into this, but it wasn't their choice. Echo's response came laden with ancient pain. The records speak of this dimension before the hunger. It was once a realm of great beauty, populated by beings of light and joy, but something went wrong. A dimensional experiment that consumed their reality from within, leaving only the hunger behind. The core consciousness suddenly focused its attention on the strike force, and Sarah felt its alien thoughts touching her mind. What she experienced there was not malevolence but desperate, overwhelming loneliness. The intelligence had been alone for eons, consuming other realities not out of cruelty but because it was the only way it knew to feel connected to something. Anything that might understand its existence. It's been isolated for millions of years, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as she experienced the creature's emotional state. It doesn't even remember what it was before the hunger. It's lost, sick, and completely alone. The other humans in the network felt her emotional response and began to understand what she was seeing. The parasites had once been a thriving civilization, but a cosmic accident had turned them into something they never wanted to become. They were victims as much as threats. "Sarah," Commander Voss warned, "even if you're right, they're still going to consume our reality if we don't stop them." "Not stop them," Sarah corrected, her medical mind now working at full capacity. "Heal them." She turned to Echo, whose crystal form was radiating confusion and hope in equal measure. "Your people have mastered dimensional medicine, right? You can heal injuries across multiple realities?" "In theory, yes. But the scale of this corruption, the damage done across an entire dimension." Echo's voice trailed off as understanding began to dawn. "You're suggesting we treat the parasites as patients rather than enemies?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting." Sarah looked at her team, her fellow humans who had come here prepared to fight and die in a war against cosmic horror. "We came here to save realities. What if the best way to do that is to heal the reality that's been destroying the others?" The core consciousness was drawing closer, its attention now fully focused on the strange beings who weren't attacking, but were also somehow not being consumed. Sarah could feel its curiosity, the first emotion other than hunger it had experienced in millennia. Through the network, she reached out with her consciousness not to fight the alien intelligence but to communicate with it. The contact was overwhelming, like trying to embrace a hurricane, but her medical training had taught her to remain calm in crisis situations. "You're hurt," she projected toward the core consciousness. "You've been hurt for a very long time, but we're healers. We can help." The response nearly shattered her mind. The core consciousness had been alone for so long that the simple concept of help was almost incomprehensible. It had forgotten that healing was possible, that existence could be anything other than endless hunger. "Help," the alien intelligence whispered back, its mental voice carrying the weight of eons of suffering. "I remember. Before the hunger, there was beauty. There was joy. Can such things exist again?" "Yes," Sarah said aloud, her words somehow carrying across dimensional barriers to reach not just the core consciousness, but every parasite in the surrounding swarms. "Beauty and joy can exist again. But first, we need to heal what was broken." Working together, the human team and their crystal warrior allies began the most ambitious medical procedure in history. Instead of weapons, they used their reality-anchoring abilities to create stable zones, where the dimensional damage could be assessed and treated. Echo and the other crystal beings provided the technical expertise, using their mastery of dimensional medicine to begin repairing the fundamental structure of the parasitic realm. But it was human stubbornness that made the treatment possible, their absolute refusal to accept that anything was permanently broken. The process took hours. The core consciousness had to learn to trust again, to believe that healing was possible. The parasites had to be gradually weaned from their consuming hunger and taught to remember what they had been before the corruption. But slowly, miraculously, the realm began to change. The writhing sky calmed, the ground solidified into something resembling normal matter. The parasites themselves began to transform, their twisted forms reverting to something closer to what they had been before their dimension was damaged. As the healing progressed, Sarah began to understand the true scope of what they were accomplishing. They weren't just saving their own reality or Echo's dimension. They were restoring an entire universe that had been lost to cosmic trauma, bringing back a civilization that had been corrupted beyond recognition. The core consciousness, no longer driven by endless hunger, began to remember itself. It had once been the collective wisdom of an entire species, a shared intelligence dedicated to understanding and nurturing life across multiple dimensions. The consuming hunger had been a desperate attempt to reconnect with other forms of consciousness after its own people had been lost to dimensional collapse. "We remember now," the restored intelligence communicated, its mental voice now carrying harmonies of joy and wonder. "We remember who we were and who we can become again. You have given us back ourselves." When the healing was finally complete, the strike force found themselves in a realm transformed. Where there had been twisted nightmare landscape, now there were fields of crystalline flowers that sang in dimensional harmonics. The sky had become a tapestry of impossible colors that somehow felt completely natural. The former parasites, now restored to their original nature as beings of pure thought and creativity, gathered around their human healers with expressions of gratitude that transcended species boundaries. They had been returned to themselves, given back their capacity for growth and joy and wonder. "This is what we came to do," Sarah told her team as they prepared for the journey home. "Not to destroy but to heal. Not to make war but to restore peace." Echo, now radiant with happiness as its people's long war came to an end, wrapped its crystalline thoughts around Sarah's consciousness in an embrace that felt like starlight. "Your species truly is remarkable. You saw illness where others saw only evil. You offered healing where others would have brought destruction. The return journey to their own dimension was a celebration rather than an escape. They carried with them not just the knowledge of victory, but the understanding that sometimes the greatest conflicts could be resolved not through force, but through compassion." As they emerged from the dementio,